Welcome to the second edition of the Daily Report. It's Wednesday, October 6th here in Seoul, and I'm Min Sun-hee. Korean contents are making remarkable strides on the global stage, offering fans here and elsewhere with a source of comfort and entertainment amid the restrictions of COVID-19. And we have more on this reality in our panel discussion today after a look at the latest updates on the pandemic front. I have Kwon So-ah standing by with the global tallies. So-ah.
Sunny, as was feared but not really unexpected, the number of COVID-19 infections here in Korea has surged, and we are back to the 2000s. 2,028 cases were reported as of 12 a.m. this Wednesday, and that includes more than 2,000 domestic transmissions with 26 imported cases. Now, this is attributed to fewer people having been tested for the virus from Saturday through Monday due to that holiday that we had, and concerns are mounting over another holiday that is coming up in the coming days ahead. Now, if we go over to our graph, we are seeing a gradual decline in past days, but now for the first time in 2 days, we are back to over 2,000 infections. But if we compare Wednesday's figures, it is a decline from last Wednesday when we had over 2,800 infections. For a closer look by region, the capital Seoul has close to 700 infections, and Gyeonggi-do province has jumped from the 400s to the 600s this Wednesday compared to a day before, and Incheon as well as here Gyeongsangnam-do province are seeing triple digits as well. Now let's take a look at the total number of cases here accumulated in Korea, over 323,000, and with a dozen fatalities, the death toll has climbed to 2,536. Meanwhile, we have over 33,800 people that remain in quarantine or under treatment. For a look at our vaccination updates now, we have 39.7 million people in the nation who got at least one shot, which is equivalent to 77.5%. Now, the number of people aged 18 and above, if we take a look at that figure, that's actually now at 90%, and 54.5% of the country's population is fully vaccinated. Let's move over to global figures. 236.5 million cases in total, with 428,000 new infections added in the span of 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And the countries most affected in total infections are, as you can see here, the US, followed by India and Brazil. Meanwhile, here Colombia and Spain are approaching the 5 million mark. Also South Africa here at 2.9 million mark, close to 3 million in total. And those are the updates that I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, expecting mothers here in the country can sign up for COVID-19 inoculation come Friday. For more on this latest endeavor against the pandemic, I have Choi Won-jung here in the studio. Won-jung, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Right, so let's begin with the upcoming inoculation agenda for expecting mothers then.
Sure, so like you said, the pregnant women are next in line starting this Friday. According to the KDCA, the pregnant women who would like to get the COVID-19 vaccine can apply online from 8 p.m. Korea time. They will be getting mRNA vaccines such as Moderna or Pfizer.
Right, Won-jung, but uncertainty remains among many of these pregnant women with regard to COVID-19 inoculation, right?
That's right. So obviously it's a very sensitive topic to discuss with them because it's not only related to mothers, but it's also related to children. So the last week, our news team, met Georgieva, who is 22 weeks pregnant and still goes to work every day. She told us that she's worried about catching COVID-19, but hasn't had her first shot of the vaccine yet. Let's take a listen.
I don't think I'm going to get vaccinated because, first, this was an emergency approval with not enough data. I'm sure there's an impact after catching COVID-19, but we just don't know how the vaccine will impact my baby and myself.
So what's really interesting is that she already had her flu shot, and she felt that it's much safer than COVID-19 vaccines because it's already been widely used for a very, very long time.
Right, indeed, Won-jung, for a very long time. And one of our panelists, I think Dr. Kim Sik-taek, talked about how the flu vaccine offers us a 60% protection against the flu, while of course the COVID-19 vaccines offer us between 70 to about 90% protection. Now then, Wonjong, for the sake of our viewers, do tell us a bit about the latest findings with regard to vaccination against COVID-19 for pregnant women.
Now, here's what I found so far. The research shows that the pregnant women are at more risk than others from COVID-19. Take a look at this graph on your screen right now. The Journal of American Medical Association in August said unvaccinated pregnant women with COVID-19 are 15 times more likely to die and 22 times more likely to have a premature birth. And here's what the expert said.
American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology issued a strong medical consensus statement urging all pregnant individuals to get vaccinated against COVID-19. And the rationale is because pregnant women have a high chance of developing severe COVID-19 and also from dying due to COVID-19.
Right, so another expert told me that misinformation and lack of understanding about vaccines still remains, and that's why many pregnant women are still reluctant to get the shot. And I think that's something that they really need right now, more sufficient information being available for them and doctors.
Right, more information, of course. Now, Wonjong, stay with us because for more, we're going to get some more insight then on the issue of expecting mothers and COVID-19 vaccination from authorities here in the country, right, Swa?
Right, Sunny. So officials here, their opinions are not much different from the stats and the experts' view that Wonjong just mentioned. Ever since the government's forecast that weeks ago to start its inoculation program for pregnant women, they have been stressing that the benefits outweigh the risks. And they have been quoting data from abroad saying that adverse responses of COVID-19 vaccination in pregnant women was similar to that of regular women. And also that the chances of premature births or miscarriages also did not climb, events that can happen in any pregnancy. So that percentage was also similar to people that are not pregnant. So let's take a listen to a latest statement made by Chung Eun-kyung, the commissioner of the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency.
Pregnant women face the high risk of serious illness and death when infected by the coronavirus. Data from the U.S. shows that expecting mothers were 3 times more likely to be hospitalized compared to regular women, 2.9 times more likely to be put on a respirator, and 1.7 times more likely to die. In Korea, 2% of pregnant COVID-19 patients developed serious illnesses, a rate 6 times higher than that of regular women.
Right now, so this vote of confidence for vaccination against COVID-19 among pregnant women here by authorities in the country follow similar recommendations by the global health body, right?
Right, and Korea is following suit after countries like the U.S. that Chung Eun-kyung just mentioned. Because other countries have higher rates of infections than Korea, that is why they are already having those figures. And also, in general, they have higher number of infections, and also they have more statistics on the amount of infections among pregnant women. So that has now proven the lower risks provided through vaccination. And I believe Choi Wonjong has more on the World Health Organization data.
Right, that's right. So speaking of sufficient data, so in the beginning of this year, the World Health Organization did not recommend vaccines for pregnant women, citing that the lack of clinical trial data. But the global health body has taken a sort of a different stance later on, because now they're saying the vaccination for pregnant women should be administered without any delay. And the U.S. CDC also said, had a similar opinion as well, and saying that vaccinations are now safe for both expecting mothers and women who are actually planning to get pregnant. And also, U.S. FDA said in August that the mRNA vaccines are safe for pregnant women and also unborn their children as well.
Oh, I see. Meanwhile, back here on the local front then, so yesterday we spoke about, that is on Tuesday, we spoke about the start of vaccine registrations for young teenagers aged 16 and 17. Now, there is talk, interesting talk that is, about whether or not to release the vaccination, is it registration rate among teenagers?
Right, registrations and I guess further on also the number of vaccinations. So booking started at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, as you said, for those aged 16 and 17. And in the following weeks, we will also have those aged 12 to 15 to make those bookings. And there were discussions among officials, including the Education Ministry, whether they should should release these registration figures or not, because vaccinations for teenagers, as we know, is not a must. Authorities have been saying it is up to the teenagers and their parents to make that decision. So unveiling the figures may lead to pressure among these kids or the parents. And the reason that's why they have discussed whether to release the data or not, but they made the decision to release the data because not releasing that could actually lead to misunderstandings that maybe vaccine efficacy, vaccination effects are not that safe for these age groups. Meanwhile, Education Minister Yoon-hye said that officials should make sure that there should be not an atmosphere where people would feel pressured or forced to make those vaccinations for their kids, their teenagers.
Right, but the bottom line is that vaccinations for teenagers are also safe.
Yes, it is safe, and actually officials have been especially mentioning that there are higher recommendations for people that have underlying health conditions, for instance, obesity, diabetes, or cardiovascular diseases. So teenagers who are categorized in that group are actually recommended to make those registrations and get vaccinated. And meanwhile, for now here in Korea, we are only allowing the age group 12 to 17 when it comes to the younger population. But we know that in other countries there are also vaccinations for even younger kids, and that has been especially an issue in the US, where there have been quite a number of children that have died due to COVID-19. And the FDA head in the US in fact said US child COVID-19 deaths are, quote, an embarrassment. So that is also again showing that even for even younger children, the efficacy, the benefits would outweigh the risks of getting vaccinated.
Right, especially in places where infection rates are very high then.
Exactly.
Right, now staying with vaccination-related events here on the local front, public debate over vaccine passes has become more intense in recent days as officials seek to broaden incentives to those fully inoculated amid concerns over basic rights. Our Min Soo-kyun reports.
As infections continue to rise among those unvaccinated or partially vaccinated, South Korea is reviewing a new system that only allows vaccinated people access to certain places, such as movie theaters and museums. The so-called vaccine pass has not been introduced yet, but it's still been met with much controversy. According to a survey commissioned by a local news agency, 64.4% of respondents were in favor of the introduction of a vaccine pass, while 29% were against the idea. Only 6.6% said they did not know or didn't have an opinion about the matter. Those who support the system say it has several benefits.
If introduced, I think more people will feel the need to get vaccinated. I also think people will be able to move around freely.
Other countries are also gradually introducing similar systems, so I think it will be okay if we have it in our country since many are getting vaccinated.
However, some argue that vaccination is a matter of choice, so unvaccinated people should not be penalized in this way. They fear that if the system is implemented, it will discriminate against those who have not been vaccinated. While experts understand that such policies might be necessary to bring life back to normal, they also stress that the government should look into ways to avoid infringing on the rights of unvaccinated people.
If unvaccinated people are to face restrictions, they should not feel uncomfortable in their daily life. They should be allowed to use the public facilities like now, but be restricted from high-risk facilities.
Health officials have said that the vaccine pass is not intended to discriminate or unfairly disadvantage those who have not been vaccinated. They vowed to thoroughly review the system so that unvaccinated people will not experience discomfort. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Right, now against the backdrop of concerns raised by our colleague Min Soo-kyun, so do tell us a bit about the incentives currently in place for those who are fully inoculated.
Well, for now, we have incentives when it comes to private gatherings. For instance, the ban on private gatherings of 5 or more people remains in effect in places that have social distancing levels 3 to 4. But still, up to 6 people can gather if they have at least 2 fully vaccinated people in some of these places, such as restaurants or cafes. But what we're looking at in the future now is that there might be some restrictions for people to enter some multi-use facilities or some events. So this is why there are some concerns that people who are not vaccinated might be discriminated in entering certain places. But we should think of this as rather incentives for vaccinated people and not discrimination against those who have not been vaccinated or who cannot be vaccinated, in fact, due to health conditions or because of their age. But I found it interesting that there was an online shopping mall here in Korea that beginning at the end of this week, it will provide discounts of up to 80% for concerts or exhibitions for people that are fully vaccinated. So it looks like already some businesses are, going along the drive of later on having vaccine passes here in the country.
Right. And going back to Soa's point about restrictions to certain public venues, Wonjong, I understand this is the reality though over in the US.
Right, so they don't really call it the vaccine pass per se, but they when they trying to enter the bars or restaurant or something like that, or even sporting events such as the baseball field or football field. So I talked to my wife, who's actually living in Seattle, in Washington, United States. She told me that you definitely need to show them the vaccine, the CDC vaccine cards, and then so I asked, do you have to get fully vaccinated? And she said definitely, because if you're not fully vaccinated, like obviously mRNA vaccines, you need 2 doses, right? So you definitely need to get 2 doses. If you just had 1 dose, you can't get in, basically. But obviously, that's just in the Washington state, and United States have many states, and that really depends on which states actually you go into. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, the debate will continue here in the country, I suppose. All right, Wonjong, thank you for staying behind for our expanded talk. And so, as always, thank you for that.
Anytime.
The U.S. State Department on Tuesday urged all UN members to abide by UN sanctions against North Korea. According to Yonhap News Agency, a department spokesperson pointed out that China and Russia continue to condone the evasion of sanctions, that is, by North Korea. The U.S. official also underscored the regime's relentless efforts to develop its nuclear and ballistic missile programs, a concern that was earlier addressed by a recent detailed report, that is, by the UN itself. U.S. President Joe Biden says he has addressed issues related to Taiwan with his Chinese counterpart. Mr. Biden's remarks come amid an escalation of regional tensions following the entry of Chinese warplanes into Taiwan's air zone on Monday. Peunji reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden said Tuesday local time that both he and Chinese President Xi Jinping have agreed to abide by the Taiwan Agreement.
I've spoken with Xi about Taiwan. We agree we'll abide by the Taiwan Agreement. That's what we are. And we made it clear that I don't think he should be doing anything other than abiding by the agreement.
He appears to be referring to the One China policy, which officially recognizes China's sovereignty over Taiwan. But Washington's stance to establish diplomatic ties with Beijing instead of Taipei comes with the expectation that the future of Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means. Biden also appears to be referring to a 90-minute call he held with the Chinese president last month, their first talks in 7 months. Biden's remarks come amid rising tensions between China and Taiwan. Taiwan reported that 148 Chinese Air Force planes entered its air defense zone over a 4-day period from Friday. Nearly 60 Chinese warplanes flew into Taiwan's air defense zone on Monday, the highest number since the island began reporting such activities last year. The previous record was set on Saturday, when 39 Chinese military planes flew into the area. Taiwan's top China policy-making body, the Mainland Affairs Council, accused Beijing of seriously damaging peace and stability in the region, and demanded that the country immediately stop its non-peaceful actions. It also added that Taiwan will, quote, never compromise and yield to threats. In response, China accused Washington of provoking the situation while warning against supporting Taiwan's independence. The U.S. urged China on Sunday to stop its military activities near Taiwan. 배은지, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund is poised to lower its 2021 global growth forecast. In a virtual address on Tuesday, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said her entity is less optimistic about its previous outlook back in July when it projected a solid rebound of 6%. She linked this latest outlook to global resurgences fueled by the Delta variant and inflation concerns. However, on the vaccination front, she remained optimistic, claiming that at least 40% of the global population will be inoculated against COVID-19 by the end of this year and 70% within the first half of next year. Meanwhile, the U.S. government is hurtling towards an unprecedented government default in about 2 weeks. Now, this is according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and our Kim Hyo-sun has more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is again warning that a recession is unavoidable if Congress fails to address the U.S. debt ceiling. Speaking on CNBC Tuesday, she explained that a failure of lawmakers to act would be, quote, catastrophic. Yellen said October 18th is the deadline, stressing that it's essential the ceiling be raised before then. Saying U.S. Treasury securities have long been regarded as the safest financial asset on earth, she insisted that putting that in question could result in a catastrophic outcome. President Biden has also called on lawmakers to raise the debt limit in order to avoid the country's first ever default. Currently, the Treasury Department is using so-called emergency extraordinary measures to pay down the country's receipts since reaching the last debt ceiling at the end of July. Such measures enable the department to both conserve cash and draw down certain accounts without issuing new bonds. However, the Treasury estimates that such measures are forecast to be unsustainable by mid-October. Economists also warn a default would lead to a widespread damage, including a spike in interest rates, a potential delay in Social Security checks to some 50 million senior citizens, as well as a pay delay for members of the U.S. Armed Services. While both Republicans and Democrats share the same view that the debt ceiling issue must be addressed, they remain split on how to do it. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, consumer prices continue their upward trend, with grocery costs of eggs and pork marking particularly high increases. Our Ji-young reports.
South Korea's consumer prices have seen on-year rises of more than 2% for 6 months in a row. Statistics Korea said on Wednesday that the consumer price index stood at 108.83 in September. This is up 2.5% compared to the same period a year earlier, far higher than the government's target of 2%.
The rise in consumer prices has been driven by industrial goods, including petroleum products and processed food, services including personal services and rent fees, and agricultural, livestock and fishery products.
The increase was largely driven by a rise in prices of agricultural, livestock and fishery products, which were up by an average of 3.7%. The price of eggs soared by more than 43%, while lettuce also increased by roughly 35% and pork climbed by 16% on year. The price of instant noodles rose by almost 10%, and the price of bread went up by roughly 6% on year. Fuel prices also rose, with liquefied petroleum gas going up by almost 28%. An expert said the rise in demand during the Chuseok holiday and more cash in people's pockets due to the distribution of COVID-19 relief funds led to the higher consumer prices.
The COVID-19 disaster relief fund that was given out to most citizens has the effect of liquidity expansion that could raise consumer prices. Therefore, rather than giving out the fund to everybody, it should be more focused on those who have suffered the most.
The expert added that the rise in consumer prices will continue in the near future, and in order to stabilize prices and control liquidity, an adjustment to the interest rate could be needed. Ji-young, Arirang News.
The UN World Meteorological Organization has warned that more than 5 billion people may have inadequate access to water by the year 2050. Now, in its latest report, it says the figure is an increase from 3.6 billion in 2018. The organization adds changes to global and regional precipitation owing to rising temperatures place food security as well as human health at increased risk. Over the past 2 decades, flood-related disasters increased by 134%, while droughts increased by 29%.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Beating Tom Cruise in the race to become the first actor to shoot a movie in space, a Russian actress and a film director arrived at the International Space Station on Tuesday as their Soyuz MS-19 spacecraft docked at the ISS. Yulia Peresild, who will hold the honor of becoming the first actor to film in space, could not hold back her excitement, saying she still feels like she's dreaming. The two reached the ISS ahead of Cruise, who plans to blast off on a SpaceX rocket for a Hollywood film that was announced last year by NASA. Peresild and Shipenko will spend the next 12 days on the space station, filming parts for the film The Challenge. In the film, the Russian actress plays a doctor who is asked to travel to the space station to save a cosmonaut's life. Over in China, with the Beijing Winter Olympic Games taking place next February, the final round of 15 testing events and activities to test COVID-19 prevention measures began on Tuesday. For the next 3 months until December 31st, test events will be held in 8 ice and snow competition venues in Beijing and Zhangjiakou. These will also include 10 international competitions, 3 international training weeks, as well as 2 domestic test events with coordination from the IOC. It's estimated that 2,000 international athletes, sports experts, and IOC officials will be at hand for the events. The massive testing event is part of the requirements by the International Olympic Committee as well as the International Paralympic Committee before the official competitions begin. According to an official in charge, there are 3 major measures that need to be in place. These include strengthened remote prevention and control by encouraging overseas personnel to complete their vaccination process and COVID-19 testing before arrival, as well as implementing closed-loop management, enforcing a strict quarantine and inspection process for all who arrive in China. And finally, all participants are to wear masks and strictly implement prevention and control requirements. The Beijing 2022 Winter Games will take place from February 4th to the 20th next year, with the Paralympics to follow from March 4th to the 13th. It has taken over 13 years, but Coldplay is back at the top of the Billboard's Hot 100 chart thanks to their collaboration with BTS. Coldplay, on their official Twitter page, also congratulated each member of BTS as My Universe is the South Korean group's 6th #1 in just a little over a year. Coldplay also thanked their fans, as well as ARMY, for making it possible for the song to top the charts on its debut. BTS responded on their Twitter, saying it was an honor to be a part of it all, while congratulating the band. My Universe is Coldplay's first chart topper since Viva La Vida back in June 2008. 이승재, Arirang News.
Every Wednesdays in this particular segment of the Daily Report, we bring you the latest events on the tech and trade fronts. In our very first coverage, we touch upon what local semiconductor companies are calling excessive market intervention by U.S. authorities. For more on this, I have our Ji Abili here in the studio. Ji, welcome.
Hi, Sunny. So last week, Washington vowed to get more aggressive in learning about the supply chain of global chip makers. We'll get into the reasons why later in the program, but that request was not very well received by the South Korean semiconductor industry. The Korean government said it will relay to Washington any concerns among domestic chip makers of having to share confidential trade information with another government. At a parliamentary hearing Tuesday, Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy Moon Seung-ok said Trade Minister Yohan Koo met with his U.S. counterpart Catherine Tai of the USTR in Paris that day. The aim of the meeting was to communicate the worries by Korean companies like Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and more. Media reports say Yo explained to Tai the information Washington requested last month is expansive and contains confidential information of trade secrets and client data. To this, Tai responded, the RFI, or the request for information, is to alleviate semiconductor shortages and will discuss Seoul's concerns with relevant agencies within the U.S. government. Also during the parliamentary hearing, Moon, who oversees the trade ministry where Yo is the head of, emphasized that the government was working to keep local chip makers up to date regarding on the matter. The 56-year-old added his ministry will work toward activating a communications channel between the two countries for close cooperation.
Right, an active communications channel, hopefully. So do tell us more about this.
So last Wednesday, Trade Minister Yohan Koo said his ministry is ready to help local chip makers to deal with this problem. During a meeting with journalists, Korea's top trade officials said, as far as we know, South Korean businesses are currently making reviews internally to decide whether to comply with the request. He did say, we believe that the request is aimed at increasing the transparency of the supply chain in the semiconductor industry. The RFI made headlines in Korea, where semiconductors take up roughly 20% of its outbound shipments. This is especially noteworthy given that so much of the country's economy is reliant on exports.
Right, and exports have been driving our rebound amid the pandemic. Now, let's rewind back to the start of this standoff between local semiconductor companies and U.S. authorities. Gee, when did it start?
So it started about 2 weeks ago. On September 23rd, the U.S. Department of Commerce asked global chip makers, including Korean ones, to respond to this request within the next 45 days. Let's hear from U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo on the reason.
As you know, we've been working the semiconductor shortage since day one of the president's administration, and it's time to get more aggressive. The situation is not getting better. In some ways, it's getting worse.
She added such information from global chip makers will help improve trust and transparency within the supply chain. Due to semiconductor shortages, automakers and related businesses based in the U.S. had to cut production, which led to thousands of job losses. Washington is requesting global chip makers to provide information on inventories, demand, and delivery dynamic. By analyzing those information, the government plans to identify where the bottlenecks are in the supply chain and then predict challenges before they happen. Automakers like General Motors, Toyota, and Chrysler have slashed outputs and sales forecasts due to scarce chip supplies made worse by COVID-19 related production snags in Asia. The Commerce Department added, companies will be asked to share the information voluntarily.
We'll be talking to dozens of these companies and urging them to comply. Of course, if they don't comply, then we have other tools in our toolbox to require them to give us data. I hope we don't get there, but if we have to, we will.
Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC, for its part, said the company was supporting and working with stakeholders to overcome the chip shortage. In what the company dubbed unprecedented actions to address this challenge, the chipmaker has pledged to invest $100 billion in the next 3 years to expand its production capacity. That's all for me today. I'll be back next week.
All right, as always, thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me.
The healing power of the arts has been brought to the forefront amid this pandemic, and heading this phenomenon are Korean entertainment contents on the international arena. For more on this, I have here in the studio Bernie Jo, a leading K-pop music export specialist. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Mr. Jo.
Oh, thank you to have me here.
Right, and I also have Professor So Jae-young at the Seoul Institute of the Arts live on the line. It's good to see you again, Professor So.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Right. Also joining this panel discussion virtually is Lucas Shaw at Bloomberg over in the US. Lucas, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Right. We'll start here in the studio then. Mr. Joe, the BTS Coldplay collaboration, My Universe, has debuted on top of the Billboard 100, top 100, that is a hot 100, should I say. Now, could we start with a bit of your thoughts on this exciting feat?
Well, as usual, when BTS is setting records, every time they're throwing down a new record, they're breaking new records, and occasionally they're going to break a Guinness World Record. In this instance, again, they've hit #1. This is probably more suitable for having a round of Guinnesses with the guys from Coldplay, because this was a first, not just in terms of going #1. This has become the new normal for BTS, but the fact that two groups co-headlining, this is the first time they've gone #1 on the Billboard chart, and the Hot 100 is just for the US. This particular song has also hit #1 on the Billboard Global 200 as well. And as much as we want to throw spotlight on Coldplay and BTS, it's been a phenomenal week for the women of K-pop. We had Lisa from Blackpink also setting new records on the Billboard charts, becoming not only the first Asian female artist to go #1 on the rap chart, but also she became the highest debuting female artist on YouTube, with La Lisa shattering YouTube 24-hour debut records as well.
Right, that is true. And for just a bit of more information, for BTS, this recognition on the Hot 100, it's their 6th, I understand, since September 2020.
That is correct. I mean, they have literally and figuratively been on a roll. It seems like they've been camped out on the top of the Billboard chart, obviously all summer. They've kicked off fall with another #1.
Right. And Lucas, what's your take on BTS's remarkable achievements within the global music arena?
You know, the popularity of Korean entertainment has been growing really for a couple of decades now. As Bernie knows better than I do, Korean management companies tried to bring musicians to the US many times over the last couple decades. BTS was really the first to break through at this level, but it has paved the way for a lot of other acts. Blackpink twice, you know, Lisa, who Bernie mentioned, is a solo act from Blackpink. And it's now almost expected to see a big K-pop act at the top of the charts or at festivals in the United States and Europe. It's one of the most popular genres on YouTube and Spotify, which are the two biggest music services in the world. And we've seen Korean dramas and other Korean TV now have a similar trajectory, where they started off spreading across a lot of Asia, and now streaming services like Netflix and Disney Plus and others are using them to attract customers in Southeast Asia. And you know, they had a small but loyal following in the US on something like a Drama Fever. But it's safe to say that Squid Game is the first Korean TV show to find a huge audience in the US. It's certainly the first Korean show to be #1 on Netflix.
Right. And Professor, so as Lucas has pointed out, Korean screen productions, this will also include Parasite and Minari. They've been making notable strides. And in recent days, as Lucas pointed out, Squid Game has been garnering much global attention. How do you explain the appeal of these Korean contents on international screens, Professor So?
First of all, thank you for having me. And yeah, when I've been watching this phenomenon happen the last 3 years, with Parasite winning all the Oscar awards, and then the following year, Minari, which is actually a Korean-American film that won Best Actress for Yoon Ye-jung, and then this year with Squid Game. So it's almost like all the stars are lining up at the same time, and Korea seems to really be on the map. But I think what's unusual about Squid Game is it's episodic content. So basically, we're getting to watch Korean television for the first time, hitting the sort of the global market. And I have a lot of things to talk about with Squid Game, why I think it's a success. But I think, as you mentioned, these Korean content seems to be the hot thing right now.
Right. And then Lucas, Squid Game, like you said, it's looking to become Netflix's biggest non-English language show. What can you tell us about its popularity over in the US, and what elements of this Korean drama appear to be resonating within audiences worldwide?
Well, it's the most popular show in the US right now. It's #1 on the chart that Netflix puts within its app. There's also a site called Flix Patrol that does a pretty good job of tracking where different shows rank on Netflix, not just in the U.S. but around the world. And it's been number 1 in the U.S. all week. It's #1 in pretty much every country that service manages. Everything from Argentina to Europe to Asia. We'll see how long it lasts. A lot of Netflix shows are very popular for a short period and then fade, but then there's some that stay on the top for a little while, kind of like Bridgerton, which is the show where Squid Game is trying to break the record. I think its success is surprising in that it's a Korean show, but I don't think it's hard to explain. It's got a very simple premise. All these people, being indebted people having to compete in these games to stay alive. It's kind of similar to the Hunger Games, which it's been compared to quite a bit, which is, one of the most popular book and TV franchises of the past couple decades.
Right, I'd have to agree. Mr. Joe, according to the World Intellectual Property Organization, Korea ranked 5th this year in the Global Innovation Index. Now, it topped the index for Asia. Do you suppose advances made by Korea's entertainment industry paved the path to this recognition, so to speak?
Without a doubt. I mean, since we're on the subject of charts, as impressive as that WIPO chart was at number 5, we have Lucas here from Bloomberg, and a shout out to Bloomberg. Their global innovation chart that comes in year in year out has Korea ranked number 1. And when we look at, we're talking about film, TV, and music, what we're really talking about is soft power. And according to Monocle magazine, Korea was the number 2 global soft power superpower in the world. And yes, pop culture industries have definitely been the engine driving, I think, a lot of this momentum. What shocks a lot of people is that the pop culture industries, Hallyu, the Korean wave, it's the 2nd largest consumer export industry for Korea behind automobiles. Last year alone, it's about $10.6 billion in exports. And one of the drivers is obviously K-pop music. Right now, K-pop music had a moment in 2020. It was the fastest growing music market in the world with 44.8% year-on-year growth. And so, yeah, when we look at what is driving this phenomena, we have to look at Korean, not just K-pop, but Korean pop culture as an industry.
Right, we do. Lucas, I believe you've covered in detail the competitive nature of Korea's entertainment content. Do share with us a bit about your thoughts on this front.
Yeah, I see Korea as the new cultural capital of Asia, if not much of the world. It's not producing as many hit movies or musicians or TV shows as the US, certainly, but there are not a lot of other countries that are doing more. When it comes to music, you've got the US first, maybe the UK second, but the 2 biggest and fastest growing genres over the past few years have been reggaeton, which primarily comes from Puerto Rico and Colombia, and then K-pop. Otherwise, you've got places like India that produce a bunch of big stars, but they don't really travel beyond their home country and some of the diaspora. I'd say the impact on the TV and movie side is a little more of a work in progress. As we've discussed, Korean movies and TV are really popular across a lot of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, somewhat in Japan. But they're just starting to break out everywhere else. Squid Game is really the first Korean TV show to travel all over the world in its native language, and most of the breakout movies like Parasite are still relatively small, but we certainly have a lot of momentum building, and I suspect we'll see more of these in the years to come.
Right, hopefully. Meanwhile, Professor, so what are your thoughts now on concerns that the global streaming services are poised to dominate the local entertainment market?
Well, it's already dominating it. Basically, Netflix is the most, subscribed or watched OTT service in Korea. It's beat out everything local. We have Wave, and I heard that Kakao TV is starting their own program, and also Coupon Play. But the problem is that not a lot of people are watching their shows, and it seems like Netflix has the sort of like what everybody wants to watch. And the reason for that is that there's not much original programming for a lot of the other local Korean OTTs. So they're going to have to really hustle to compete with it. But who can compete with Netflix? I think it's behemoth, like a huge monster that's already had a head start. Basically, they started with DVDs. I remember the days when they would mail in DVDs and things like that. And then when they went online, basically, they've just taken over the world. Their expansion idea of going to different countries, as Lucas pointed out, Korea is another big site. India is another one. And I think this really paid off for them handsomely with Squid Game, because If they only did localized programming in the United States, I think they wouldn't have had this kind of surprise. But by expanding to other nations and having sort of their content sort of, because it's on the internet and it's global, everybody gets to watch it. And as Lucas pointed out, this is a Korean show, written in the Korean language. And of course, it's got subtitles and dubbing. But yeah, everybody instantly kind of gravitated towards it. As you know, it's a really fantastic art direction also, and then just a simple plot of these people trying to survive. And as people pointed out, it's a version of Hunger Games or Battle Royale, the Japanese film, where just people are killing each other. But I think more than just the fact that it's a killing game, I think what really stands out about it is that it's a story about people that have and have-nots. I mean, Korea has this big problem between the rich and poor. And so this is a global phenomenon. And with, COVID-19 exacerbating this situation, we're seeing more of a gap happening. And I think people really kind of gravitate towards the story because of it.
Right. Meanwhile, Mr. Joe, Korean dramas on Netflix, they also include Kingdom, Sweet Home, and the more recent DP. Now, they were all based on webtoons, which are Korean digital comics. Having said that, how are webtoons shaping Korean drama contents, in your view?
Well, the word itself, the concept, the category, the genre webtoons is 100% Korean. And a lot of people, when they talk about Korean pop culture, Korean pop music, often the words cultural and technology are not two separate words. They're just smashed together. And it's really sort of, I think it perfectly encapsulates the idea of why Korean pop culture has exported so well, is because technology is usually driven by the culture, and the culture is usually fueled by the technology. Webtoons as a platform, I think in many ways, is a perfect vehicle of what we're seeing. And over the past few years, I mean, Korea doesn't have a version of Marvel Comics or DC Comics, but the closest thing that we have right now is webtoons. They were able to take the comic book culture and through technology bring it into a new platform and a new paradigm. And what I find extremely fascinating is not only are webtoons going global, similar to music and movie and TV, but now you're starting to see global players wanting to get on webtoon formats and webtoon platforms. For me, being a big Batman fan, recently a Batman original webtoon is now debuting worldwide through Naver Webtoon. And so we're starting to see these types of global, not just creative, but commercial collaborations happening as well.
Right, which is great, of course. Personally, Lucas, what other K content looks to be gaining attention overseas?
Well, I think all eyes are on K-pop first, which is, we've seen the success of BTS. What we don't know is how many of the other acts are going to be able to follow it. And how long they will last. If you look historically with kind of teen pop groups, the life cycle tends to be pretty short. They form at an early age, and as they grow up and mature, they all have different desires, or something causes them to splinter in some way. It's quite possible that these will buck that trend. But if acts like BTS and Blackpink do break up, do they have individual members who go on to be really popular? They have had different members release some solo projects, and I assume that will continue in the years ahead. On the TV front, personally, I'm just trying to keep up with everything that's been put out. We live at this time right now where there's such a high volume of new film and TV. Some of the ones that you just mentioned to Bernie, I'm aware of, but I still haven't gotten a chance to watch yet.
Oh, you haven't? Which one have you not yet watched?
I haven't watched Kingdom or Sweet Home.
I see. Hopefully you get to see it in the near future. Professor, so meanwhile, curtains have gone up on the Busan International Film Festival, which will run until next Friday. Could you tell us a bit about this year's event?
This year, I heard that there's about 223 films, and they're doing it basically in theaters for audiences to come and participate. As you know, in the past, because of the COVID crisis, there was a lot of festivals that went online, or they made limited things, but they're really opening it up for this year. And I'm really happy to introduce Im Sang-soo's new film. It's called Heaven to the Land of Happiness, which is going to be the opening film for the festival.
Right. And Mr. Joe, do tell us a bit about the role of translation in better relaying Korean language contents to international audiences. It was something that Professor So mentioned earlier.
I think when a lot of people look to and talk about and study best practices on why Korean pop culture, Korean pop music has exported so well, is I think the underlying theme that we see across the board is this idea that Korean pop culture products really have a localized strategy where when they put a new work of art, be it TV, film, music, they're thinking not of three different markets, a local market, regional market, a global market, all somehow being three separate markets, or A leading to B to C. It's pretty much one shot, one time, one day, one market. And so what's interesting is that a lot of that really involves excellent subtitling, excellent translations, and excellent dubbing. Some industries are a little further ahead than others. I think with music, it's just standard, it's normal that you'll see a Korean song title with the English translation side by side, or you see the artist name with the English spelling side by side. And that's probably one of the reasons why Korean music has been so easy to discover worldwide. When we talk about Parasite, I mean, the subtitles were impeccable. It's because we had a mutual friend of ours, Darcy Paquette, who was very much actively involved in making sure it wasn't good, it wasn't great, that it was perfect. But again, given the volume of how much TV content is coming out, you're going to have a few hits and misses. And I think the fact that there's so much heat online about the translations and the subtitles and the dubbing is really a testament to the passion that viewers around the world have, because now they demand and they want, and rightfully so, not just good or great, but perfect.
Right, expectations have been raised.
And translations, yeah.
Right. Lucas, going forward now, what efforts do you propose to perhaps further raise the universal appeal of Korea's entertainment efforts on the global stage?
Well, I think the success that we're seeing a lot of these different shows, movies, and songs have is going to be self-perpetuating. You know, Netflix, as we've discussed, is currently the biggest investor in Korean content of the global players, and I think it's only a matter of time before you see Disney Plus, HBO Max, Amazon, and many others copy it. You know, some of these new services have either just expanded to Korea or they're not even there yet, but plan to. You know, Netflix has staked out such a strong position in that market with millions of subscribers and lots of hit shows. And I think any of these streaming services that want to compete with Netflix on a global scale are going to try to kind of do the same thing and copy from their playbook. I think on the music front, it's really just a question of touring, I would say. You know, we've seen the popularity of a lot of these acts on streaming services. But we haven't yet seen some of them sell out, you know, big stadiums and arenas all over the world on a big tour on a consistent basis. But I have to imagine that that's sort of next on the to-do list for a lot of those companies.
Right, it is. All right, Lucas, thank you very much for your insights today. Professor So, thank you for being with us. And Mr. Joe here in the studio, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Right. The UN Cultural Agency claims the importance of the power of the arts has been brought to light by COVID-19 as music, movies and more bring people together to soothe and share. We'll be back with more on similar efforts same time on Thursday.